Hey, it's Nick here from Greyscalegorilla, and in today's tutorial, I'm going to show you how to set up a dynamic rope simulation in Cinema 4D. Now, this tutorial is inspired by this beautiful render Chad Ashley made to show off our brand new paracord materials available at Greyscalegorilla. And for this tutorial, we're trying something new. After we build this together, you'll be able to choose your own adventure. Yep, you'll get to choose between two follow-up tutorials where we show you how to finish this scene in both Octane and Redshift. All right, let's head on in and let's get started. All right, here we are in Cinema 4D. Let's get started making this rope scene. First thing we're gonna need is a spline. Let's head up into the spline menu and grab the helix. Now the helix is the fastest way to create a straight line. All you have to do is come down to your object menu, go to start radius, set it to 0. In your end radius, set that to 0. And your end angle, set it to 0 as well. And now that we have this straight line, I like to make a preset. If you want to make a preset too, click this little triangle here. You could save a preset. You could see I made a couple straight line presets, one at 100 centimeters, one at 200 centimeters. Go ahead and save a preset, and then you'll always have a straight line when you need it. Next thing I did was I grabbed our subdivision and I set it to 50. We just don't need as many subdivisions for this type of rope, since the type of rope that we're creating is a lot more stiff than a normal floppy noodle, for example. All right, now that we have our straight line, we need to create the geometry that will allow us to render these ropes. Splines won't render anything until we add geometry. So let's go ahead and hit Shift-C on our keyboard, and let's type in sweep. We're gonna grab a sweep. We're also gonna hit an end side, hit Shift-C, N space S-I-D-E, hit enter, and an end side will show up. And now we have all the ingredients to make a rope. All you have to do is drag the end side under the sweep and do the same with the helix just under the end side. Now, we technically have a rope, but this end side is giant and we need it to be real world scale since we want this to look realistic. So let's go ahead and grab our end side and set it to 1 centimeter. This will make it way smaller, much more like a rope. And we could also add a few more sides while we're at it. Let's go ahead to 14. We can always turn this up later, but while we're working on simulations, we want to keep this as low as possible. Okay, now that we have a rope here, how do we make it dynamic? Well, grab your helix, go up to tags, go to simulation tags, and click on rope. And if we back up and we hit play on our timeline, you're going to see our rope is now dynamic. It just falls down because gravity is taking a hold. Now, for this tutorial, we're not going to use gravity. If you want to play with gravity, we have other tutorials that show you other rope techniques. For this specific look, we're going to be more underwater vibe. And so for that, let's get rid of gravity. I'm going to hit Control D on my keyboard. That's going to pull up our project settings. And you want to go to Simulation, go to your scene settings, and just set gravity to 0. Now when we hit play, nothing happens. And for now, that's what we want. But we're missing a lot more ropes. So how do we make many more ropes in the scene? Well, if you've been using Cinema 4D for a while, you know the answer, and it's a cloner. Hit Shift-C and type in clone. And it's the second one down for me. It's this little green icon. You could highlight it with your keyboard, just hit enter, and it will add it to your scene right away. Next thing we want to do is add the sweep into the cloner, and we want these ropes to be much closer together. So let's go down and adjust the settings. Under the cloner, you're going to see count. And you want the first count to be 3, the second one to be 3, and the third one to be 1. And this will make a cluster of ropes that are 3 by 3. And again, they're too far apart. So let's go here and just set this a lot closer. Let's go to 3 by 3 as well. And now we have our little cluster of ropes across the screen. Again, if we hit play, nothing happens because we have no gravity or nothing really affecting it, but we're going to change that in just a moment. Okay, now that we have all these ropes, what I really want to build is a rig that allows me to control each end of these ropes so that we can make interesting patterns and curls and all that stuff. And the best way to do that is to use a connect tag. Let me show you how to set this up. So first thing we need to do is make all of these splines editable. Now, this is for quite a few reasons. The main reason is we want each of these ropes to be a different texture. So go ahead and select your cloner and hit C on your keyboard. And this will turn every individual rope into its own sweep with its own settings. Now, this is great for texturing reasons, but what if we want to change all of these tags together at once. What is a good way to do that? Well, let me show you a really quick way. All you have to do is select all of the tags you want to change. And of course, if you have them all selected, you can come down here and make any changes you want. But what if you want to make changes later? Well, you don't want to come back in here and select all these tags again. Instead, we're going to use a selector to allow us to select these tags at any moment in the future that we want. And so to make that, all you have to do is hit Shift-C and type in select. And you're going to find selection right here. It's a little square with an arrow. And if you have everything highlighted you want to be in this selection, and you just hit enter or double click on it in this menu, it will add all of those tags into a selection. And we don't need the cloner in there. Let's go ahead and delete that. All of the ropes that we had selected are now in this selection. Well, what does this let us do? Well, anytime we want to make changes to these rope dynamics, all we have to do is double click on the selection tag and it automatically selects all of those tags, and we're ready to make global changes without having to do that by hand. And you can do this with any object, your end side, your helix, anything you want to put in a selection, you could use that. All right, now that we've done that, we got to make a few changes to our dynamic settings here. The first one is our radius is now different from the actual tube that we created. If you remember, our end side is 1 centimeter radius, and this one is 0.5. So we want to make this 1. This will make the dynamics make sure that nothing is touching, and you'll see that in just a minute. Now that we have that all set up, we want to make this connector at the edge here so that we can start to control and give dynamic energy to this simulation. For that, we're going to grab a cube and we're going to shrink this way down. I'm going to make this 6 by 6 by 1. And you're going to see why in a second. If we move over and zoom in, this cube, if I move it over just a little bit, the corners of this cube are aligned right with our geometry here and right with our ropes. And here's why we set it up like this. We're going to go into the cube, and what we're trying to build is a controller to control all of these ropes at once so that we can move this cube around. And as we move the cube, the ropes follow, and we're going to be able to animate dynamic energy into the simulation. So the best way to do that is to come in here and make this object a cloth object. Now, we're not going to use any of the cloth settings, but for this to work, any objects you want to connect to each other have to be a part of this simulation. So we're going to make this a cloth, and we're also going to come in to the tags while our cube is selected. We're going to create a connector. There it is right there. Boom. Once we have a connector selected, we want to connect each of the corners of this cube to each of the corners of this rope. Now, don't worry, you don't have to do it by hand. This connector will do all the hard work. First thing we need to do is click on Always Draw and Update Live. And right away, you're going to see some connections. We have a connection on this edge and this corner and this bottom corner and that bottom corner. But if it's connecting from here to the edge of the rope, why isn't it connecting in the center right here? Well, that's because our cube doesn't have as much geometry. It only will connect to corners and vertexes and points on our object. And our cube right now is just 1 polygon on each side. So all we have to do is up this number. I'm going to go 2 by 2, and we don't need it for the top. And now all we have to do now is adjust our search radius and make sure that all the connections are there. And if we look closely, we're going to have 9 connections for 9 different ropes. So what does this do? Well, if we hit play, you're going to see things start to move around, because now that things are connected, there's some energy in the system, and the cloth is affecting the ropes and the ropes are affecting the cloth. But I don't want this. I want to control where that cloth goes, or this cube goes, I should say, without gravity or any of the dynamics taking over. And luckily, there's a setting for that as well. Inside of our cloth on the cube, we want to go into Mix Animation, and you want to say With Pins. With Pins says, do not move unless I want you to. In other words, if I place you here, I want you to stay there. And if I move you up here, I want you to stay there. Now, you want to make sure you keyframe these things or use Signal, because your cube will stay there and then your connection will be broken at the beginning. So let me go back to the beginning, and we're going to set this up so it doesn't do that. You can click on your cube, go into coordinates, and just set this back to 0. And then you don't want this cube touching. You want it away just a little bit so that it doesn't affect the simulation. Okay, now that we have all this set up, what can we do with it? Well, you already saw part of it. You can move things around, and you can animate this cube and get these wiggly waves. I'm going to make our timeline a little bit longer just so we could see what's happening. You get these awesome like whipping effects, and all of the ropes work dynamically. They don't intersect each other. You get these really cool effects. We're going to fix this problem here where, again, we have to lock it down a little bit more so that when the timeline resets, that our cube also resets. I'll show you how to do that. But I just want to show you what you could do. We could also rotate and get some really cool curling effects. Look at that. Really fun. And we're, spoiler alert, we're going to do this to the other side so that we can twist these things together and get really interactive dynamic ropes. So let's set that up. First thing we'll do is place this cube exactly where we want it. We'll finally lock this puppy down. Let's reset our rotation. If you've played around along with me, let's reset all this stuff. Except for the Z position, we do want it to be just far enough away where it's not messing with the physics here and the dynamics. Now that we have that, all we need to do, check this out, is duplicate this cube. I'm going to hit Control C, Control V on my keyboard. And if you're on Mac, you got a different key commands, but you know that. Then I'm going to take this cube and I'm going to move it to the other side of the simulation. And you could type this in. I think it's -200 or something like that. But we also want to rotate it around so that it is aiming the opposite direction. And so let's go ahead into the cube settings and let's set this to 180. And let's move it just to the other side. And now that we have that set up, we have both ends of this simulation ready to do whatever we want with. Again, if we hit play and move stuff around, it's going to do that weird locking. So from here, here's what I recommend. I recommend setting some keyframes and experimenting with moving things up and down, or even moving things in and out. This is a really cool effect here. If you just push through and then come back out, we are getting some odd things here where this cube is trying to lock to the other side of the simulation. If you get this, I've had this happen before. If you get this, go into your connector on this object that you moved and mess around with the search radius until it's only connected to here. Might be a little bit of a bug or something, but that seems to fix it. Once that is reset, it is now connected to this side of the simulation, and you have all of this cool freedom. You can push all this stuff around. So highly encourage you to play around. That stuff is super fun to play with. But what if you want to control the simulation and not just move it around your viewport? Well, this is where you can either set up keyframes, or in this case, we're going to use Signal, which is a Greyscalegorilla plugin that helps you animate really quickly. For this, we're going to make these twist around. So how do we quickly do that? Well, on this first cube here, I'm going to go into our coordinates, and I think it's the B rotation that we want to animate. Yeah, look, there it is. That's what we want to do. So since that's the case, all you have to do is drag whatever parameter you want to animate into Drop Zone. Now, Drop Zone's another plugin, including in Greyscalegorilla, that helps you set up animation super quick. Watch how fast this is. All you have to do is say, okay, I want to animate my B rotation. Go ahead and drag that into Drop Zone. Drop Zone's going to automatically make a signal tag up here on my cube. And now we can fully animate this however we want with no keyframes really quickly. In this case, I'm going to set this to linear, and my minimum is 0 degrees rotation, and my maximum, let's call it 1,000 degrees. And as soon as we hit play, you're going to see that cube start to rotate, and it's going to rotate for 90 degrees or 90 frames, and then it's going to stop. If you want it to rotate longer or shorter, you could adjust that here. And if you want it to ease in and out, in my case, I want it to start fast and then ease out. You could select different preset curves, and now it starts rotating right away and then eases into its final resting place. Let's do the same on the other side. In fact, we already have this animation. We could just literally drag it down. I'm going to hold Control on my keyboard and drag the signal tag down. back up to frame 0, and now we have 2 sets of rotation all coming together to create this crazy, wacky curling effect. And in fact, I want this to go longer. I don't want it to just stop at 90 frames. I like the idea that it's going to continue moving maybe for 200 frames. So I'm going to change that for both signals. Another great reason to use signal is you can make changes like that really quickly without going into your keyframes and adjusting it. You can make global changes like that. Okay, so now that we have 200 frames of animation like this, it's coming together, but I think it's too similar on each side. So what are some other ways that we can affect the variations of the simulation? Well, here's where I encourage you to play around with turbulence. So I'm going to hit Shift-C on my keyboard. I'm going to type in turbulence, T-U-R, and right down here, you're going to see it. I'm going to hit Enter on my keyboard, and it's going to add it right to my scene. Now that I have turbulence, we can go into Strength and crank it up. And let's go to Scale and crank it up too. I'm going to overdo it at first just so you can see what turbulence is up to. Turbulence is adding turbulence to the whole simulation. It's almost like windy tornado swirling around, is moving stuff all around. Now this is too much. Let's make this a lot more subtle by turning down the strength. You could also turn the scale down to make those waves a little bit more subtle. And this is looking a lot better. This is more like that underwater rope kind of curling effect that I want. From here, we may want to start to play around a little bit with the settings in our simulation. Now, I'm going to hit Control D on my keyboard again. It's going to pop up my project settings, go to Simulation, and then click on the Simulation tab. Let's talk about substeps. Substeps are super important. If your ropes are being too droopy, too curly, moving too much, and just not moving the way that you want them to, there are 2 places that you can look to change that. One is in the rope settings itself. Remember, we made this selection just by double clicking this selection here. Let's rename this to rope settings. Just by double clicking this, it selected all of our tags. Now that we have done that, we can go in and make global changes. So you could change the bendiness. You could change the stretchiness. You can make the friction higher or lower. You can mess with this stuff in here. However, these tend to be more subtle changes when it comes to how ropes behave. And if you're cranking this stuff up and down and not seeing the result you want, you may want to go into your project settings. So I'm going to go back into our project settings here, go to simulation. Let's finally talk about substeps, Nick. All right. If you crank this up, let's just literally double the substeps. You're going to see the simulation is a lot, what I call is like tighter. Things are less droopy and floppy and wavy and noodly, and they start to get more underwatery and more tighter in a way that is more controllable, I think, in a way. So if you need more control over your sim and you are tired of things moving around, this includes cloth as well. Definitely play with substeps. It's a huge setting for this. The other one I want to show you is damping. If you want to make all these moves a lot more subtle and things are flopping and waving around, I encourage you to turn up the damping. And this, again, will give you a little bit more control, especially if you're moving this stuff around like that. Look at how much more control that is. The wave still happens. We still get this amazing dynamic wave, but it's a lot more controllable, and it does more of what I want it to do and less of what the simulation is calculating, if that makes sense. I hope I am explaining this properly. At the end of all this, I just encourage you to always mess with these simulation settings. We have other videos where we go deeper into these settings, so keep an eye out for those on YouTube here, but definitely check that out. Okay, for me, I think we have a pretty cool animation going on. I want to turn up the turbulence, but I also don't want to affect all of this over here. So I want to show you one more tip when it comes to messing with turbulence in your dynamics, and that is fields. What if you only want parts of your animation to be affected by turbulence? Well, this is where fields come in. Now, you could use any one of these fields, but for this setting, we're just going to do something basic like a spherical field. Let's grab it. Let's center it on our simulation. Grab the scale tool and scale it down. What this means, and what we set up is now the turbulence is only affecting the middle of our simulation. So this allows us to crank the settings up a little bit more. and get a little bit more wacky without messing up our curls on the outside. So now you see we have this waving around and we get this nice curling animation. And it also allows us to now zoom in and start to frame up what we want our final animation to look like. Lovely. This is great. I want one more thing, which is I want one of these after it starts curling to push in and to give us these clumps that you've seen in the example. So to do that, I'm going to go back to our first frame here, and I'm going to animate our left cube, and you could keyframe this. I'm going to use Signal because it's just so much faster here. I'm going to go to coordinates, and we're going to adjust our Z position. That is the one I want to animate. So all I have to do is drag our Z into drop zone. It'll automatically make a tag. Now, all I want to do is swap min and max because I originally want it to be at its original location. And I don't want it to be at 0 centimeters when it's done. I just want it to push in just a little bit, maybe to here. So now we have an animation that goes from here to from the start to the end. And if we go back to frame 0, we see that it is now set at its wrong location. Now, all we have to do is go down here, go to set linear, and now we have a animation that goes from where it started to where it ended. And this is the effect I'm trying to do. I'm trying to push the ropes into each other to create these little curls and knots that you saw in the example. All right, now that we have a basic rig set up, we're ready to start to add textures and animations. So we'll see you in part 2 of this tutorial real soon. Thanks for watching, everybody, and don't forget to check the description down below for part 2 of this tutorial, where we show you how to finish this scene in both Octane and Redshift. Hope to see you in the next video. Bye-bye for now.